So I'm this one.
No. James and Josh, you're supposed to swap. Oh, is this the way they told you to go? They told me. Oh. Okay. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Can you hear me? Good afternoon. Can you hear me? I think you can just about hear me. My name's Rory Jones. I'm a technology correspondent for the BBC, and I've got a little panel here. Now, they're all pretty shy. Nobody very forthcoming here. They've got very few views on anything. So I'm expecting you to help me out a bit here. I've also got a really bad back, and these chairs are designed to torture anybody with a bad back, so I may get up and walk around a bit from time to time. Let me introduce you to your panel, who are going to roam far and wide across the whole future of cybersecurity. Eugene Kaspersky, familiar figure, Chief Executive of Kaspersky. Nice little round of applause there. Oh, look at that. Next contestant, James Lyne from Sophos. Stand up, James. Show us your T-shirt. James has decided that the invitation was a bit formal, so he's come in his T-shirt. From the United States, from New Hampshire, in fact, Joshua Corman. Little way from Josh. Who we were having a little discussion about how he wanted to be described. He wants me to punt. I am the cavalry, which is a shadowy group of international megavillains. No, it's dedicated to peace, justice, and all good stuff. And last but not least, Rick Furgeson. Stand up, Rick.
I've lost my mic.
He may look like a refugee from an 80s rock band, but in fact, he's one of the most charismatic, important senior figures in global cybersecurity, Vice President of Security Research at Trend Micro, and more importantly, a guy who I can call up and will give you 15 seconds on any subject like that. But he's going to give us rather more than 15 seconds, as is everybody. Well, I'm going to start this panel by, first of all, going down each person, and what I want is a bit of fear. I want what frightens the most over the next 3 to 5 years in this cybersecurity landscape, because we keep hearing all sorts of worrying stuff. We've had the Yahoo hack a few weeks ago. We've had talk of hacking cars, and the threat that the Internet of Things faces. But I want them to choose one thing that they're really scared about, because if they're scared about it, we should all be scared. So Eugene, you start off by terrifying us.
Yeah, first of all, I'm sorry, but it's rather hot here, so I want to
keep going,
take my jacket off.
I should borrow.
So the worst of the worst. I think that you just named that. Attacks on their other devices, other systems which are critical, maybe critical. The attacks on power grids, which already happened last year in Ukraine. So the attacks on the rest of Internet of Things. The systems which are hyper-connected and which we depend on there as individuals, as businesses, as nations, as the global world.
And who are you most afraid of?
Well, I'm really afraid about their very professional mercenaries, cyber mercenaries, the criminals which are able to do any kind of the very sophisticated attack, and they will be, I'm afraid about scenarios when they are paid to do that, and actually that's the worst case, I think that the worst case scenario to me is that there are very bad guys paid to employ their professional cyber criminals and attack their most critical parts of infrastructure.
James Lyne, you make a practice of going into companies. I think you've been into my organization and put the wind up people. What are you putting the wind up people about at the moment?
Well, look, so I spent a lot of time unpicking IoT devices. I very much agree on that. For me, the big concern is looking at the whole landscape of different devices we're deploying in small businesses and consumers, the weird connected junk, the Wi-Fi toothbrush, all the way up to cars and the like. Throughout the whole ecosystem, what scares me is that as a society, we depend on all of this stuff more and more and more, whether it's economic or social or education. This tech is becoming a founding pillar of everything we do. Yet when you lift the surface slightly, in my last talk, I took a Wi-Fi plug, did a quick bit of reverse engineering, hard-coded usernames and passwords, terrible certificate practices, a version of Linux that was cool when I was a kid. It seems like we're so obsessed with building bigger and bigger boats to carry us to new places with our technology, whilst we're completely ignoring the fact that we're making the holes bigger and depending on them all the more. So for me, it's the landscape fear of all this stuff coming in and reopening old wounds that we really should have learned our lessons on by now.
Isn't the problem that the people you're taking this message to, or the people that a lot of the folks here will be probably telling other people within their organization about these threats, and they're getting a lot of apathy back. And in wider society, consumers have been told about this stuff, and they've got a vague fear, but perhaps they're not actually seeing a direct impact on their lives, or if they are, the bank's going to pay anyway.
Right, I mean, I definitely still run into the whole, I know cybercriminals are interested in credit cards, I don't really understand why they're interested in even an email address or any other data. Ransomware in some respects has helped us there in people starting to appreciate that their data can be valuable to cybercriminals just by being valuable to them. But yeah, broadly, I think we are sometimes in the habit of speaking inside the echo chamber. I know Josh has strong opinions on that. And it is important that we get out to society more broadly. I do think that the average consumer really isn't to blame for plugging in a Wi-Fi kettle and thinking that's a kettle, not a computer. And
aren't they right to think that? Why the hell should I be worried about my Wi-Fi kettle? What's going to happen? What's the worst that's going to happen?
Well, you know, I kind of agree. Look, I want consumers to be more aware because there are things they can do now. I can give you some top tips to help. But the truth is a lot of these flaws should be fixed endemically. If you sell a car with no brakes, you're in real trouble. If you sell a CCTV camera that has hard-coded credentials, navigates to the internet, and allows it to be used in a replication attack to break the law, oh well. So I do think that there is a greater burden towards the vendors, and I do think there's a part to play in the security industry for us as professionals, in regulators forcing these issues, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't take advantage of trying to educate consumers as well.
This message, is it getting through to consumers, or is there an increasing resistance from consumers to security messages that they've heard time and time again, change your password and all that kind of stuff?
Right.
Isn't there a big problem with consumer boredom, frankly?
You know, I think we're at a point of the highest awareness of cybersecurity we've ever had, breaches in the news every week, and a certain degree of fatigue sets in. I've had conversations with people where they're like, I can't do anything about this, so I'm not going to try. On the positive side, I frequently will ask, you know, someone when walking down the street, my favorite one is London taxis. I like to ask them about IT security best practices.
Not a good idea.
Oh, it's great, you know, because, you know, they start to tell you and give you advice and you're like, yeah, cool, yeah. And they'll replay the advice that we would have given them 5 years ago. 8-character password, a capital, you know, non-dictionary word. They'll do exactly what is now terrible advice in our industry, but they did listen. So I think our biggest problem is maybe not that they're totally fatigued and they don't care. I think our biggest problem is trying to keep them up to date with our changing standards of what good represents, and making them understand that maybe a 14-character password is better, or what on earth is two-factor authentication and why do I care? I'm generalizing massively to the population of the world, I appreciate, and I'm sure my co-panelists will have other opinions, but keeping them up to date is maybe an even bigger part of the problem.
Josh, you and I were talking beforehand, and you, to be frank, were not worried about credit cards because you were worried about far bigger things. You're worried specifically about healthcare and its vulnerability. Tell us about that. Is that your biggest concern?
Sure. I mean, as others have said, I'm mostly concerned about where bits and bytes meet flesh and blood. So that's hackable cars, hackable medical equipment, industrial control systems, planes and trains, power plants, etc. And you know, we spend an awful lot of time talking about sophisticated attackers and nation-state attackers. But the problem is, with all of our time and energy going into the Fortune 100, 100 of them have lost intellectual property and trade secrets. Every PCI-compliant merchant taking credit cards has had a breach. The failure rate is about 100%. So there's a lot of talent and money and time spent on credit cards which are replaceable, or bank accounts which are insured. And they are important. And I like my privacy, I like my credit cards, but I want to be alive to enjoy it. And what we aren't spending hardly any time on is the basic hygiene for these safety critical industries that don't run on Windows, that don't have security staffs, don't have security budgets, and have a different set of adversaries that might be more ideological. They might want to inflict harm. And we don't make them have to be very talented. You can use free attack tools. You can search for things on Shodan, which is a web browser, to find industrial control systems with hard-coded passwords. You can use free attack tools like Metasploit or Kali Linux distribution. And with very, very little skill, you can do significant damage if you wanted to. So relative to the higher consequences of failure, we spend the least time and money improving cybersecurity and hygiene. I think you're going to get a consensus from the four of us on that. But more specifically, of all the hackable things that can cause harm, I am most concerned about hospitals. And one of the reasons is they have statistically about 0 security people on staff, 1 or 0 people. They have Windows XP, Windows 98, Windows NT in the clinical environment well beyond their end of life. They never patch anything. So if I were an attacker that wanted to harm people, the most familiar environment to attack and the easiest one that's least defended is the hospital environment.
Isn't your problem here that hard-pressed hospitals, particularly in this country, are going to say, you're talking about a theoretical threat. We've got an imminent threat right now, which is we're running out of money. You've not shown us any evidence so far of damage being done to what we care about, which is patient care. So
I'm on this is a US-centric thing.
Yeah.
But our Congress asked for a 1-year task force for our healthcare system for cybersecurity, and I'm serving on that. And one of the reasons it came up was they're concerned that as people, there are a lot of deaths and a lot of accidents caused by failures in IT, but there isn't very good logging or evidence capture to be able to tie that to worms and viruses or attackers or whatnot. But their bigger reason is they want to do more advanced medicine and more connectivity, and they're afraid that if we overconnect even more, that we might lose the trust of the public. So in the process of doing that, what we're finding is somewhere in the middle of that being announced, ransomware started hitting hospitals, and they're paying a lot of money to get their systems back to be able to handle patient care.
Is this that we hear vague reports about ransomware? Obviously, lots of organizations that are probably paying
thousands and thousands of hospitals have paid ransoms, and the ransoms are going up. And the one that made the news that scared me the most is most people just pay. But Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital in Los Angeles, they failed to pay in time, and they had to send patients to other hospitals, and they had to turn ambulances away from their facility
So
to
what
other
happened to their
hospitals.
systems that made them have to do that?
Well, their systems were wide open. They got hit by a piece of ransomware called SamSam. It was a known flaw in JBoss, one Java vulnerability in one device from one manufacturer. It's entirely avoidable, but they didn't know better, and it almost got people killed. And in my heart, if an accident can almost get people killed, what could a more determined adversary? You know, here we are in the UK, and 1 year ago, on August 24th, a Birmingham citizen who moved to Raqqa, Syria after joining the Cyber Caliphate. You had Junaid Hussain, who was part of Team Poison and Anonymous, take his hacking skill to ISIS. And that's somebody who's not a very good hacker, but he had the means, motive, and opportunity to do something like the Hollywood Presbyterian attack. So I am so tired of talking about replaceable credit cards and never talking about ensuring medical delivery is reliable, available, and defensible.
Rick Furgeson, the last time you and I spoke was a couple of weeks ago, and it was about one of these boring old stories, the Yahoo hack, a huge amount of personal data out there. That is still, for the general public, the big focus. In this country, the TalkTalk hack was a huge story. The Yahoo hack, a pretty big story. That's what people are worried about. Are you as an industry saying, don't worry about that, there are worse things going to happen at sea?
No, I mean, your initial question was, what scares you the most? And that feeds into it really well, actually, as a secondary question. And it also relates to everything that you guys have been saying. What scares me the most, and this is related to Yahoo, so bear with me, I'm not doing a politician
Don't worry,
on
this
you.
is good, this is good.
What scares me the most is all the people in this room.
Yeah, me too.
All the other people who work in and are responsible for security in organizations, because you're not, in general, doing a very good job. And attacks like TalkTalk and Yahoo and any other that you could care to mention is an illustration. And this is not a personal attack, and I realize I'm alienating all of you. But those kinds of attacks, TalkTalk's a great example, shouldn't be possible in 2016. A SQL injection attack should fail. It's easily mitigatable. But because enterprises are not doing enough about the basics of security, these attacks continue, and individual citizens are impacted by that with loss of financial data, credit card data, medical services, vehicle hacks, IoT hacks. It's all related to a poor implementation of basic security standards within enterprises. So for me, the most worrying thing is those people who are responsible for security in enterprises. Like I mentioned when we were talking before, you can ask a big audience this question, and I'm going to do it now because the answer is always interesting. And you've got to be honest, right? How many of you in the room can hand on heart say, all of the data in my enterprise which should be encrypted is encrypted?
Oh boy.
It's a security basic. Multi-factor authentication. These things are simply not rolled out, and they're easy tools, they're cost-effective tools. Most of them don't require buying any or much technology from anybody. Security principles, need to know. How many of you actually make information available internally on a need-to-know basis, really and truly? How many of you use a system of least privilege? If someone only needs to read something, do you make sure they can't write to something? Security basics, and we're failing, we're all failing. That's why I'm scared.
And that's what you're most scared of?
Yeah.
Apathy.
The fact that we're
Because
a bunch
it
of losers.
enables everything else.
Apathy.
So
Yeah.
how do you deal with that?
Education, 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 to paraphrase, I hesitate to say a politician, but to paraphrase someone. A lot of it is about making sure that, and James spoke about preaching to the choir, which absolutely we do, speaking to the echo chamber, preaching to the choir. It's about making sure that this, not only is the message made available, but it's made available in an accessible way. And one of the things we did last year, because we were talking about what's the problem? Why don't people listen? And I think a lot of it is, well, Josh just said apathy, that's definitely part of it. But a lot of it is that thing that we all suffer from, which is it's never going to happen to me. I'm the best CISO in the business, I hire the right people, I invested in this good technology, it's going to happen to the other people, it's not going to happen to me. So one of the things that I was trying to do in my role of providing educational type material was we made an interactive scenario where it's a video thing, you click through, you get to make all the decisions, you run the action, and you can be successful and not be breached, but people weren't. So it's about making sure that people realize they can be a victim and making that information available.
Eugene, you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah. Hello? So I'd like to add one more question to the audience. How many of you did the penetration test or security audit last year? Better. That's much, much better.
So
how many of you do it regularly? Once for some period of time? Okay, okay. So actually that's an answer to your question. How to educate people. Let them to have a security audit. Let somebody to simulate the hacker's attack.
Yeah.
You will learn so much about your enterprise.
You know, James said about we're always building a bigger boat and it gets bigger holes and people focus on the newest, shiniest, greatest thing. It's true. So one of the newest, shiniest, greatest things that everyone's talking about right now is sandboxing. But one of the basic things that we failed to do is sandbox our employees. Let them fuck up in a safe situation. Let them make mistakes and learn from them. We don't do it.
Isn't one of the huge problems that you guys face is that within an organization, you're seen as the killjoys. People like me are coming into organizations, big organizations, and have rebelled over the last 20 years. The whole bring your own device phenomenon. We have seen you guys as the people who want to stop us having better technology and more fun technology. James, I'm blaming you.
I personally want to make sure you can't have any fun.
Yeah.
Look, I think we do sometimes fall into, and I'm talking as security professionals generally, we sometimes fall into the trap of the no guys, sometimes for good reason, sometimes because frankly, you mentioned the 0 or 1 security professionals. We have this saying of the OIO, the only information officer, right? And it's the guy that's changing the paper in the printers, trying to keep the Wi-Fi on, manage passwords, manage security products, do all this stuff. A lot of the time, I think those no's are born from, I just can't take any more. I can't figure out whether you're right to be wanting to use this device, Rory, or not, so I'm going to say no. And there's been this whole drive over the last couple of years of security that embraces these things, that says yes. I'm a big fan of if you work with the business and you enable people to do these things, they'll come on side and try and work with security, because they're not bad people. They don't put things on USBs that are unencrypted to make you miserable. They do it because they're trying to do their jobs. So a lot of it is about ease of use, simplicity, saying yes where we can. And all of that for me dovetails back to something that Rick touched on that I think is really important. And I agree with your, we're all failing. It's very depressing.
They'll beat both of us up
I
now.
need a stiffer drink than a coffee now. But I was in a breach scenario last week with a company. They had appliances doing network security. They had firewalls. They had all kinds of fancy, shiny boxes that looked amazing. We looked at the security appliance. It wasn't Sophos, by the way. They looked at the appliance, and there's a checkbox that turns the security on. Literally a checkbox. Someone turned it off because it blocked some users doing something, so they disabled it. Did they have logging on their expensive DNS server? No, because it wasn't on by default. Shame on that vendor. Log by default. When it came to looking at the email servers, they went to the email provider, and the email provider said, you didn't pay for logging for more than a week. We had no ability to reconstruct these events, and when you actually analyze their security, they did some password stuff, a bit of patching, and ran AV. It was like the 90s, man. They'd spent a lot of money on failing to turn this stuff on. Part of that shame on them, part of that shame on the vendors for not making it possible for them to do it within the resource constraints of reality.
I want to slightly switch the focus to the enemy, as it were, who is on their capabilities. So we heard a couple of weeks ago from Yahoo about state-sponsored actors. Is that the new threat? Eugene, is it, says he delicately, is it Russians? Is it Chinese? Is that where the threat's coming from? And if so, aren't we helpless against that kind of threat?
Yeah, actually it's very hard to attribute who is really behind of these attacks, because we are a cybersecurity company, we are a cybersecurity industry, which we don't have access to the internet traffic, we don't have access to the mobile operators' data. So it's not our job to point the finger who is behind that. But in many cases, we can guess the nation, because we can see, in many cases, we can see the language which is spoken. And according to our view, according to our data, the most, if we're speaking about the state-sponsored attacks, which are definitely not criminal. So the most spoken languages are native English, Atlantic time, native Russian, and simplified Chinese. Who is the best or the worst? I don't know, because there are so many attacks coming from the cyberspace. So the most spoken languages are these three. But at the same time, there is French, Spanish, Spanish, Latin American, German, Italian, Arabic, Korean, not Japanese. I don't remember any state-sponsored attack that speaks Japanese, but at the same time, it's not attribution as well, because I remember the cases then, there is definitely state-sponsored attack which speaks or pretend to speak native English. And then there is a typo, which native speakers will never do. Like a typo in the word like thank you. You can't do that, but maybe some nations they can do. So well, actually, that's my view, that there are top nations in our state-sponsored games, and then the rest.
Josh, doesn't this leave a lot of people feeling, even across the cybersecurity industry, feeling a bit helpless? What can we do against that level of attack?
Well, this might be a good bridge between your prior topic and this one, which is, I think one of the problems is the security vendors, of which we are complicit. We sensate in the press, of which everyone's complicit. We tend to say this is a state-sponsored attack, a sophisticated attack. But the sad truth is, we've invested so much in attack and offense and sophistication language. Most of these attacks are successful with very, very simple attacks that anyone could do. So I think one of the reasons we skip the basics is we're distracted by the bright, shiny headlines and the really hard stuff. Now, it doesn't mean that you can afford to ignore state-sponsored espionage, but what I'm more concerned about is all of our apparatus and industry is focused on the theft and the confidentiality of data or intellectual property or credit cards. But there are other adversaries now. We have subnationals and ideological groups. We had Anonymous doing protests and other hacktivist groups. And while they have less talent, they have a higher intent to use it. So if you make like a little XY axis of high capability versus high intent to use, there's really no amount of security you're going to do that's going to stop at the strength and the determination of a nation state. But they tend to be more rational in the things they go after. I am far more concerned about the high intent, low capability actors who aren't very talented, but they're talented enough. And that's why I brought up Trick and cyber jihad and things like that. Because the truth is, right now we're talking about who's hacking the US elections. Mm-hmm. The truth is, it could be anybody. The security is so terrible, any one person could potentially tip the outcome of a free election, for example. And that's not isolated to the US. I mean, most governments do a very terrible job on the basics as well. So I think what you should look at is the motivations for hacking are as varied as they are in the human condition. And I've been looking for what are areas where there's means, motive, and opportunity. And what I'd like to do is see us raise hygiene and defense sufficiently high enough that only nation states and organized criminals can be on the battlefield. But right now, anyone can be.
Rick, you were a bit cynical, I think it's fair to say, about Yahoo talking about a state-sponsored actor.
Yeah, it's cool because I'm talking to a mostly UK audience, I guess, so I can reference Batfink. Batfink's catchphrase was, "My wings are like a shield of steel," and that's how people use terms like state-sponsored and PCI compliance or any other compliance. Something happens and they go, "Yeah, but it was the nation state. There's nothing we could do." Or, "But I was compliant. It wasn't my fault." It's becoming a duck's back for people. It's allowing the accusations and the failures to slide off. And I think part of the problem is, and again, it's about changing mindset and hammering the message home again and again. A lot of it is about the way that we do security, and it goes back to apathy and complacency. We've always done security in the same basic architectural way, which has been from the outside to the center. Build the strong perimeter, have a DMZ, have another perimeter, have some on the wire technology, have some on the server technology and content scanning, and then down to the endpoint. And it's all from the outside to the center, and most of it's looking out. That's okay, you shouldn't stop doing that, but actually you need to build it from the other direction. You need to start from the center. You need to start securing data, authenticating users, securing individual systems, and build out to the edge. Because what we consistently fail to do, and which would be useful in detecting even the sophisticated nation-state level attack and stopping those that are not at that level is looking at what's going on internally. Because you've got to accept there will be breaches that you can't stop. Hopefully we'll reach a point where that's nation-state only, but you've still got to be able to recognize that that's happening and be able to act to mitigate it. But if you consistently use the old-fashioned model of building from the outside in, instead of turning it on its head, you'll never reach that level of success because you're not looking in the right place.
Which kind of brings us to a question of how much cooperation there is and how responsible, frankly, the cybersecurity industry itself is. Josh, you were bringing up, when we were chatting beforehand, a kind of disturbing example in the United States of not good information sharing about potential vulnerabilities. Is that a problem?
I would shift it from information sharing to collaboration.
Yeah.
I think information sharing has dominated the policy conversation for 5 years, and it's all about sharing how we already failed. I would much rather see collaboration on defense and protection strategies that work, or maybe hacking incentives to make it easier to defend things. What I was bringing up is that if you look at something like the Apple versus the US FBI, one wants backdoors, one doesn't want backdoors. I think we keep fighting over the tactical issues instead of looking more strategically, that in general, the good guys don't work very well together, whoever the good guys are. And when we have tensions between civil liberties and security and inspection, we're not doing a good job discussing those trade-offs in a strategic way. So it's less to me about information sharing about what failed and where it failed and how it failed, and more about what should be the priorities for defense that scale at the rate that we need to play at now.
James, we're just, I'll come to you in a moment, Rick, but we're just opening a national cybersecurity centre in the UK. Is that a load of old spin, or is there really a kind of a British crime-fighting super force being set up that will bring together you guys and GCHQ to go and save the world?
There's been a lot of discussion about public-private sector collaboration over the last couple of years in the UK. There's been a lot of statements thrown around why don't you guys work together more? And the truth is, in the background, we actually do quite a lot tactically in all those contexts. And none of that is disagreeing with
you also
what Josh
compete
said.
Furiously to get to zero-day vulnerabilities first, and
right, it's
maybe not.
But the competition for us is who can build the best technology that people want to adopt and use. It's not about you can't see my malware, because if we do that, we all fail. So there is there's a grown-up attitude, a kind of industry club that we all participate in, where we discuss these things, because otherwise we would be weaker.
Are you sharing with Eugene all the time?
Yeah, we do, yeah, all the time, daily, yeah. It's
How many years?
like 26, 20, it's a long time.
That's
it's a really
so
long
sweet.
time.
Yeah, peace
So
of love.
we'll hug it out at the end
Yeah,
when the
yeah,
microphone's
yeah.
done. But so there is a lot of it happening. I do think Josh is very on the money about that more strategic element. I'm really hopeful about the NCSC, and knowing some of the people involved, they're
This is
good
the National
people.
Cybersecurity.
Yeah, they're good people that are true believers in that mission, that are technically capable, that I've worked with in other contexts over the years. If they achieve half of the mission they've set out, they'll achieve something that's quite special and we can be proud of on an international basis. I have no idea how that's going to go, but I'm very excited about it. I think one of the key issues that comes out of all of this round of questioning for me is the upcoming problem of fidelity of public perception. I was with some banks the other day, and they were talking about information sharing, just as I've talked with NCSC about information sharing and how we'll do it. And we all admit sometimes we get the walls a little too high. These banks in particular are like, I don't want to tell anyone in case they use it in a competitive context.
People to know about a breach.
Right. And one of the key things they said was, when we have someone drive a van into a branch, we're the victims. When we get turned over by a high-intent attacker, and I don't mean the nation state, but something that really was hard, we're to blame. we're about to enter a period with GDPR or post-Article 50 equivalent, who knows, something at least that strong, if not more robust, where we're going to name and shame. Do we have the tools as an industry to be able to let the public know the difference between the innocent victim and those that have been negligent? Or are we just going to drag everyone through the bushes backwards every time they fail and create even more disillusionment?
You know, one thing that doesn't come up. Hello?
Sorry, I did you a job there.
Yeah, one thing that doesn't come up enough is we talk about defenders, right, at the bank, or we talk about attackers, or we talk about the security vendors that try to help. Most of the things we're securing are pieces of software with hundreds of known vulnerabilities. So we're getting vulnerable goods from the Oracles, the IBMs, the Ciscos of the world. They're not responsible at all for good hygiene. Basically, one of the arguments I had with one of the software vendors is, it's none of your business which vulnerability risk decisions we make on your behalf. So we're going to make a risk decision and pass that risk down to you, our customer. Number two, it's none of your business to know which vulnerabilities we're passing on to you. Number three, if you ask for it, we're going to tell you no. And number four, when you're breached later and you have to buy insurance and cover the cost of the breach, we're not liable for the failing. So one of the problems we're getting is that without any sort of accountability or liability in the IT that we're buying, why would they do a better job writing more secure code? Why would they turn on the security by default flag? There really isn't much of an accountability.
Yeah, James, you seem a bit, to me, slightly over-sympathetic to these poor old banks worrying that they might get dragged through the mud because they
It's a shared responsibility.
Major breach. Surely it's time for a bit of naming and shaming.
You know, I actually sit on both sides of this fence. I agree with a lot of what Rick said about basic failures, about how people use the nation-state card as the shield, and very often, if you look at mainstream cybercrime, you see clever return-oriented programming chains, ASLR bypasses with non-participating modules, really clever technical development of high-end exploits hitting the consumer. And then some of these organizations or even governments are turned over by a Word document that says, here's my calendar for the next week. Please click enable content on this macro. So I am cynical that they are responsible, that basic mistakes are made. I don't disagree with that position. But there are also cases where people get hit by 0 days that they really couldn't do anything about, where they really were the victim. And I'm concerned that we're putting all those people in one category of negligent idiots in the eyes of the public going forwards and creating a mechanism that's going to name and shame without the distinction.
You need a standard of care. Define a standard of care.
I'm just going to see, we've got under 10 minutes left, and I just want to make sure that we include some interaction from the floor if we've got it. Has anybody got a question, a point they'd like to make? We've got roving mics. Anybody feeling particularly interactive? Thinks you've heard a lot. Have we got a question there? Yeah, we've got a question here.
Hi, Joshua mentioned responsibility and accountability. So in many situations, you know, I see products that say this is a 5-star rated product. If it's a financial product, it might have a de facto rating that says, hey, this product has got a 4 or a 5-star de facto rating. How about the idea of having some kind of a rating system that we could actually have companies sign up to, that actually stood as a bit of a badge to say, we've had the penetration testing, this is what we found, this is what we did to fix it, and we've got a 5-star rating or a 4-star rating, and then at least you can kind of make a judgment call, right? What do you guys think about that kind of idea?
Rick, why don't you come in on that?
So that's interesting because it actually echoes one of the predictions that we came up in the Project 2020 research that we did with Europol. And we kind of floated the idea, because we were looking at what's the future of technology and what will the future risks be, and therefore the future exploits against those risks. And one of the things that we came up with as a prediction was the idea of nation states having a cybersecurity rating. So currently, nation states get financial ratings, like Moody's, for example. You've got a AAA credit rating, or you've got a junk, or anywhere in between. If you could say, this nation state, in terms of how they police cyber, how they enable it, how they legislate for it, and how they regulate it, meet these criteria, you can maybe then decide, okay, that's where I'm going to put my investment, that's where I'm going to choose my third parties, that's who I'm going to do business with. And I think that there's a strong possibility that something like that could quite easily filter down to an organizational level, because one of the big problems in organizations getting breached is that whole island hopping chain of attacks where, yeah, you might not want to go after this organization because they're pretty good, but you can go after their third parties. Well, if you can begin to choose your third parties based on where they stand on this sliding scale, that's going to help you up your security. It's going to encourage smaller vendors to up their security to meet those standards. And as cyber insurance becomes more commonplace, it's going to allow you to push down your premiums because there's a rating system. Devising that rating system is going to be the problem.
Eugene, that's a good job for you.
That's a good idea. 5-star cybersecurity company, expensive to hack, and have the logo on the web page.
Hey,
Just briefly, because we've got one more question.
so there are actually 4 attempts to do food labels. I can't explain them all. One is I actually wrote a 5-star cyber safety framework for connected vehicles. Number 2, Mudge from Loft and At Stake has created a CITL to look at individual binaries. So he's doing a FICO score for how good the security is. Number 3, Underwriters Laboratories is creating some sort of a label and a seal called the Cyber Assurance Program. And number 4 is probably the most useful to all of you. There's a push for a food label for software that says, tell us the third-party and open-source binaries you use. They should not have any known security defects or CVEs without justification, and your goods should be patchable. And if you can have a food label for software, you might not get a score, but at least you're making an informed risk choice.
We've got one more question. I know James wants to come in, but I want to get another question from the floor.
Oh, right. Hello. Hi. Thank you very much. I'm Tom Ray from SC Magazine. I was just wondering, you touched on it with the issue of product liability and the fact that companies aren't held to account. And so often we hear somebody's got, got ransomware, they clicked on something, and we blame the idiot user for having clicked on that. When are we going to stop blaming the users and start blaming, putting the blame probably where it belongs, on the software creators, the security vendors, and so on, for failing to create, for basically enabling an environment in which people can click on this stuff and get infected with this horrible malware?
James, I think that's a good one for you. Stop blaming idiots like me.
I kind of want to fish you now. I don't blame users. I do think it's important to educate them and recognize their part in attacks, but we can't expect everyone to be a specialist. And one of the things I found over the last year is when you look at the average quality of a scam, they used to be laughably bad. You're like, who would click this?
Yeah.
Now, I recently took bank ham messages, real bank communications and spam messages. The spelling in the spam messages is often better. The images look better. Like, you pick the scams if you followed the advice that people have in their security policies. So I think, look, we can't ignore the user. They're an important part of it. We can't put a safety bubble around them with them having no part in it. You can't do that. But, I'd be interested in that.
We're going to get some disagreement. This is good.
But so I think we should educate them. I don't think you can bubble them completely. That being said, I do think there needs to be a large focus on security that's easy to use in the background, that doesn't make them make choices they don't understand, and on forcing vendors to be responsible when they make negligent choices like hard-coded plain text credentials. Never okay.
Yeah,
Tell me I'm wrong.
you disagree.
Not completely, but. Well, actually, it's a very good idea to have more secure operating systems and applications, to design it in the right way. But it's not compatible, it's not possible in a free market, because the stuff will be more expensive and late to the market. It will lose competition, that's it. So for individual devices, the built-in security is almost not possible, almost. But speaking about critical infrastructure, speaking about the power grid, transportation, etc., that's a very good idea.
I think Josh has got a parallel with the water, the bottled water industry.
It's not all or nothing. Part of free market is once you render transparent information so people can make a free market choice, you can still have junk food, but you know you're eating junk food. And to me, it's about what are the levels of responsibility for the various parties involved. So there is a negligence level for the manufacturer, a negligence level for the operator at the bank, a negligence level for the customer. But until you scope out roles, responsibilities, and reasonable care, you can't do that. So Eugene's right that no one will buy the bulletproof, really expensive product, potentially, but we haven't even tried to be transparent about the risk choices people are making. So I think there's a lot we can do still on free market choice.
Rick?
There's a big difference. There's a big difference between negligence and vulnerabilities existing in code.
Yes.
And if you can prove negligence against a software vendor now, they're already liable. That doesn't require any change in the law. If you can prove that software, because of a negligent decision that a software vendor made, and they sold it to you, and as a result, you suffered harm, they're already legally liable. You can't make them legally responsible, for example, for the presence of a previously unknown vulnerability that somebody discovered in the product. We don't do that with any other industry. The auto industry is quite at liberty to issue a recall for vehicles and basically patch them and give them back to you. That's how it works in the software industry. And I think one of the things, if you do start making individuals or organizations legally liable for vulnerabilities in code, and vulnerabilities in code pretty much will always exist.
Known vulnerabilities.
Yeah,
known
but any. I'm saying if we start saying, if we find that there's a vulnerability in this code, whoever wrote it, individual or organization, is liable, you're going to kill open source. Because no one is going to be wanting to be developed free and open source software with the potential of being legally liable if something went wrong with it. And that would be a terrible, terrible thing.
But then you make the do care standard. You don't make it having vulnerabilities. You make it having a known vulnerability. Think about a car. Yeah. If I were to sell a car tomorrow with a known defective airbag, I would be sued into oblivion.
Yep.
So the presence of a 0-day, that happens. Willingly, knowingly using a 12-year-old vulnerability, that should be negligent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't the key problem here that we've got a technology industry which rightly is trying to get the public excited about the amazing potential of everything from the Internet of Things to big data to artificial intelligence, and telling them at the same time that this stuff is really dangerous is not a great sales pitch. And you guys are the gloomy guys in the corner trying to hose down everybody's fun.
So for me, the perfect state for information security in the enterprise is when the information security department ceases to exist. One of the things that we always talk about, and we've kind of obliquely referenced it without saying it outright here, is that bolt-on security is terrible. Security after the fact is terrible. We need to stop doing that. It's got to be built in. If we can make the information security disappear and have the function in every other part of the business, then we've reached an ideal state for InfoSec in enterprise.
I'm going to allow you one last word, Eugene. We've just had the timeout signal.
Yeah, I'll be short. So actually, that's a good question about the situation. What's going on? Why do we live there? I call it the cyber middle age, because we have these new technologies, we have these new products and services. At the same time, we still don't know how to design it in the right way. So it's like alchemistry. They were trying to find a way how to make the gold by mixing the different stuff. They simply didn't know that it's not possible. And we are living in the same time. So we have the cyber, but we still don't know how to use the cyber in the right way. Still don't know. All most of us. But me, I know.
He's the man who knows. That's a good note on which to end. Eugene Kaspersky, James Lyne, Joshua Corman, and Rick Furgeson, thank you all very much. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can we ask you to please exit the auditorium?